So, for a while now, almost every station, very few exceptions, droning on this narrative about racist America, about racism being as horrible as it's ever been, no progress being made, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I wanted to look into it because I found it very strange that it is so repeated, um, and data that's being used is a little bit funky. Um, so in effect, everything we've seen, um, CNN, on MSNBC, on to a certain degree, more or less Fox, but they tend to take lead to follow the lead. But we see a great deal of publicization um, black victims when it has to do with interracial crimes, so white on black, black on white, etc. Um, and there's been lots of accusations that they tend to forego covering the when it happens in reverse. So, for example, if there's a shooting, a black person gets shot, it's more likely to be covered than when a black person does the shooting, or a Hispanic, etc. And of course, now with the immigration rhetoric, there's been a real active push against any suggestion that might associate crime with any sort of Latino group or immigrant. Um, Same time, we're seeing a lot of news around white supremacist hate groups, KKK. I mean, things that we haven't really seen in our news for a while, but now it's becoming very frequent. Um, and of course, the traditional ones about systemic racism, hate crimes, etc. Um, the interesting thing I found is that the counter arguments, the stats, you would think that the typical stats you would choose to discuss if you're choosing to discuss this problem would be the interracial, meaning, one race victimizing another race type of stats. And yet the counter argument is always like, well, majority of crimes are, so white on white crime versus black on black crime. I don't understand what black on black or white on white crime has to do with a problem of racism, because by definition, that is not a problem of racism. So I wanted to look around and find what what the government has in terms of published reports, and I was able to find one. It seems that during Obama's administration, they published the racial breakdown by victim and by offender. For some reason now they've kind of stopped. The same report no longer has the breakout victimization, but I'm hoping that it'll be returned. It'll be returning. But in any case, so here's my thesis. I'm looking at that specific report. It covers 2012 to 2015, just to see if, in fact, racism was there. And while if it is there, it should at least trend towards what it is today. Admittedly, it'll probably be lower if this narrative is true, but it should at least trend-wise point out to this racism that's been happening in the States. My thesis is that if racism exists, and understanding that hate crimes and whatnot, they've been poorly maintained, the hearings, how they get captured, the intent, all that stuff, and I'm less concerned about the crimes of somebody getting insulted or dead named or whatever. I'm looking at actual crimes. So I was thinking in terms of violent crimes. There's a report that does separation by race and Hispanic of violent crimes. So if there is true racist crimes, it'll be in the violent crimes. And the thesis goes as follows. The racist animated crime should be present in the total crime stats and will be made apparent after filtering out the same race violent crime. Because if it's racist crime, it should be in the race on race type crimes, not same race crimes. If white racism narrative is true, then white on black crime should be greater than black on white crime. And of course, white on Hispanic crime should be greater than Hispanic on white crime, of course, after adjusting the population disparity, because there is a larger population of whites. So we'll have to level set that. Now, racism is a motivation of hatred. So indicators, because in this report there are certain indicators around the type of attack. and the relationship as well, not just the race, but the relationship vis-a-vis the attacker. So given that racism is a motivation of hatred, indicators such as weapon type, firearm, blunt, unarmed, whatever shows a higher intent to harm should correlate with a higher racist animus, right? So if you have that incremental hatred, if it's not just a normal crime where you're attempting, that's just your criminality, then it should show. So whatever group shows a higher animus towards another group. And of course, of the domestic, close relation, and stranger categories, logically, racist crimes should not be, it would be least logical for them to be within the domestic and close relation categories, because you're not likely to be a racist and be married to another race person, but it's most likely to be in the stranger category. So I would say that the categories that have higher incidence of domestic or close relation violent crimes, those just simply happen to have a challenge when it comes to domestic violence or close relation violence, but not necessarily racism. If anything, it shows the opposite. It shows inclusion. It shows the ability to integrate. So this is the report. It is called The Race and Hispanic Origin of Victims and Offenders, 2012-2015. And this is specifically what it contains. It includes all violent crime. And the way they define violent crime, it's a combination of simple assault and serious violent crime. Serious violent crime is made of rape, sexual assault, and aggravated assault, such as assault with a deadly weapon, assault with a vehicular assault, etc. Not particularly sure what the hell simple assault would be. I guess that would just be punching, I suppose. In any case, assault would be sort of the threshold victimization crime. So I would say that should have a healthy representation of those nasty racists that we're being told about. So let's see what the numbers say. I've done a bit of filtering because, surprisingly, even though this provides you all of the tables and data, they don't make it easy to be able to pull out and compare. So you have to do a bit of doctoring to I have not changed the numbers, but you have to do a bit of math to actually subtract this population from that population to get to the actual number of crimes. But I've done that, and these are the numbers, and there's also the link provided to the report. So feel free, if you have a question, feel free to do the math yourselves. But this is already surprising. The total number of black on white crime was 540,000 versus white on black crime of 92,000. That right away was a bit of a head scratcher for me. This is not population adjusted. This is raw numbers. This is just the number of crimes, period. Similarly, Hispanic versus white, 400,000 to 169,000. Right off the bat, even without population adjustment, the ratio is off kilter. These are the ratios of the population as per the last census. So the ratio of black to white population is 1 to 5.22, and Hispanics 1 to 3.91. So in effect, if you actually want to understand the incidence, you would have to multiply these two ratios. So the incidence of someone being likely to suffer an assault at the hands of a given race. So for example, it is 30 times less likely that a white person will attack a black person than a black person attacking a white person, because it's this times this. It is 9 times less likely when you replace Hispanic for black. That's a significant discrepancy. So the data, not only does it oppose the racism narrative, it actually paints a pretty aggressive picture of the reverse. So this is challenging. Now, granted, within this number is baked, let's say, natural criminality. Again, there is no reason to assume criminality levels are any higher in any particular group. And again, the media insists that, if anything, any other group than white tends to have lower criminality rates. So I've not even attempted it, because had I actually put it in, even if I assume a higher criminality rate, that would simply leave more racism to be even further expressed. So let's assume that racism is baked in as even. Then the delta, let's assume that criminality is baked in as even, then the delta is largely reflective of racism, racial animus. But let's drill in further, because this is even more concerning. The association of offender to the victim. Now, again, racism would be in whoever has the higher stranger categories in terms of violent crimes. It's black on white here, Hispanic on white here. In fact, in the other two, it's preferable to have the higher category versus having the higher category here. And I believe white has the higher category in all but one of the examples. That's, again, another concern. So it seems that white populations are more likely to be inclusive. The level of force is another concern. So the numbers you don't want to have are higher numbers in the weapon categories or lower numbers in the no weapon category. And in all categories, in all of the negative categories, it's not the white population. It's black on white, any weapon, 24%, 24.7 versus 20. In firearm, 11.1 versus 10.1. And of course, no weapon, it's 64.9 versus 72.6. That's significant. The largest differential is here. So it's 1.5 times more likely to pick a gun when facing a Hispanic person, when a Hispanic is facing a white person, than a white person when it's facing a Hispanic. That's concerning. So right now, this is not the narrative. So not only do we see a higher incidence of the crimes, we see a higher amount of crimes, a higher incidence of crime, higher likelihood of being victimized. Basically, when a white person attacks either a black or a Hispanic, they're less likely to do so with a weapon or a firearm. They're more likely to be unarmed. And in all categories, whites seem to perpetrate less crimes vis-a-vis either vis-a-vis either of the respective races, and they seem to display a lower intent to harm and a lower predilection to attack strangers. So in a race crime, a white person is significantly more likely to be the victim rather than the perpetrator, which completely negates this racism narrative. So now let's kind of analyze that, because let's be clear here. The media selects which interracial crimes it showcases, and the majority are the majority of crimes, not the ones that they choose, but the majority, as we've seen, are on white crimes by a vast margin. So the negative selectivity bias ranges between 600% to 3,000%. So either 1 in 6, they have to pick out of 6. They have to pick out of 6 stories. They have to find the one that happens to be with a black victim, or if you follow full incidentality, out of 30 stories, they have to find the one that they want to choose, as opposed to ignoring the 29 others. That's a significant bias ratio. I mean, normal error bias would be, okay, well, they just weren't paying attention. That would be a 50%. They got one wrong, they get the next one right, kind of thing. A significantly high bias and a significantly lengthy narrative, it shows basically that this is a deep and lasting bias. It favors a certain accusation, and it basically is it is textbook racist. It's provably racist, because it is both deep, long-lasting, and significantly high. Most importantly, by favoring this sort of narrative, it is in effect race baiting, because it is painting a picture. And I'm not so certain that, and it isn't simply I'm not making this video to whine, but rather this is a very reckless behavior that encourages dangerous consequences. So a perpetual systemic racism narrative is going to cause an increased level of conflict prone behavior. So obviously, if you're not white, you are going to increasingly assume what the narrative keeps drumming into you, which is if you meet a police officer, there's a higher likelihood that you will be shot, most likely killed. And depending on just how young you are, how influenceable you are, you may believe that, in any given situation, you're likely to have a gun pulled on you and killed simply because of your color. Likewise, in any general situation, you're likely to be attacked by the racist Americans. So consider what that does to a person's conflict-seeking behavior. It elevates the temperature. It creates a conflictual atmosphere. But most importantly, in those cases where there's legitimate elevation of a situation, like a police encounter, etc. Imagine if you're just some 14-year-old kid that has never had a run-in with police before, but now, let's say it's, he's got that uniquely bad luck that he's got maybe like a line of drugs in his pocket, or maybe he borrowed his friend's gun because he thought it was cool, and now he's getting pulled over. What are the likelihood that this kid's going to act in a way to not spook the cop and not make him draw a gun and shoot? Whereas had he not had this narrative, he would likely be able to go through that situation and make it out alive. All of these straight line sort of derivations of logic, this is not news to the media. I mean, the media have extremely capable analysts and researchers. It's not like this data isn't available to them and they don't know it. This is specifically willful behavior. So now you kind of have to ask why. Because if this is not a true story, not reflective of reality, it's painting a very negative picture, it's creating a charged atmosphere in the nation. Why would they do that? Well, I think the answer is pretty clear, because it benefits the news. Because a hateful atmosphere creates conflict, and conflict is news and ratings and money. So, I don't know. Let me know what you think, and if you like, comment.